So Zed, I heard you're really excited that your political hero John Kasich is going to be making a major appearance at the Democratic National Convention. So I'll give you the floor to talk about this one,
Oh,
since you're the
I
super
mean,
fan number one.
yeah, I mean, Kasich is yeah, he's an interesting guy in the sense that he was part of this kind of cohort of people who ran for president at the same time as Donald Trump. He obviously lost. I think he won maybe just his home state of Ohio. And he has been part of this cohort of people who I think have been kind of outside the Republican Party, even though they're still kind of Republicans or conservatives. Sometimes they're called quote unquote never Trumpers, meaning that maybe they're Republicans, but they don't want Trump to be president. They don't support him. They're not going to support him in the next election. And then he announced that he's going to endorse Joe Biden. Former governor of Ohio, obviously it's a swing state, so there's some relevance there either way. And then there's a whole like phalanx of other never Trump type people who are doing the same thing, including the people working for the Lincoln Project, which is kind of a super PAC, kind of going after Trump and some Republican senators. As well as it looks like the McCain family will be endorsing Joe Biden at some point. Joe Simonson at the Washington Examiner reported that a while back. So I think that there's just this cohort of people, and it does seem controversial among some progressives anyway. I don't know that it's a huge faction, but some of the people online, they don't seem to be the biggest fans of Kasich deciding to speak on behalf of Biden at the Democratic National Convention. They are suggesting that this is some kind of betrayal of Joe Biden's values, although it seems to me more like, and I'm not trying to persuade anyone whether or not the whole idea is good or not, but I just as an analysis, like I think that Kasich is endorsing Biden. Biden is not endorsing Kasich, right? So like Kasich saw Biden's platform, his message, his general campaign, and said, I'm behind you. It wasn't the other way around. So I don't think that we can view this as Biden giving something to Kasich. It's probably just that Kasich gave something to Biden. And I think with that analysis, it looks a little bit different than maybe some of the criticism he's getting.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling on this is that like I think the left doesn't really have a right to necessarily like try to stop this or really complain about it. They do have a right to be sad about it and to kind of lament it. I think that's valid because this is complete. I mean, this is the worst nightmare, right? Like this is the sort of replay of the 2016 Hillary strategy of like, the good Republicans support us and we're the party of like, sensible people, right? And this is basically on steroids. To be honest, this time around, I can't really, I mean, the fact that Joe Biden's the nominee made this sort of inevitable, right? The Lincoln projectification of the party. I mean, I think it's probably pretty in line with just the kind of candidacy that Joe Biden presents, right? And so I think I guess it makes sense. And who knows, maybe it'll actually work better than it did in 2016. In 2016, it was obviously a disaster. That was completely the wrong moment for that sort of message. It was a populist moment. Is this a different kind of moment? And is it, a different kind of candidate where that message is going to work better? That's totally possible. But I do have to agree with people that like politically, just in a sort of like, take a step back sense, I mean, I do think it's bad. I mean, I don't think that this is what we should, I mean, I don't think this is what the Democratic Party should be, right? Like, I think it's fundamentally long term. I think this is probably going to be bad for the party to just be this like sort of centrist, anti-populist kind of party that's just appealing to sensible suburban center left to center right voters. That may work for one election cycle, but then it's going to produce another 4 years of stagnation and another backlash over and over and over. So it kind of depends on like, I think the left complaining about this is, it's a political complaint, and I think that's valid. And it's a long-term kind of vision complaint. And I think that's valid. But if you're complaining about it from a tactical sense, I think that's when you're on probably shakier ground. Like, who's really to say? I mean, Joe Biden is your candidate, right? He's the guy. You're not going to switch him out for Bernie Sanders at this point. Um,
Well, it's
so,
interesting in that I wonder if this is the reaction that Biden wanted, because Biden would use Kasich to say that he's not all the way out there with Bernie anyway. And look, these Bernie dead enders are getting mad at me for bringing in this sensible, moderate Republican guy from the Midwest who doesn't like Trump. Hey, all of the sensible, moderate Republican guys in the Midwest should be voting for me because, hey, look, this is the Bernie bros don't even like it. So, like, I almost feel like politically it's kind of what Biden wants. Like, that he would want some type of backlash from the left to do the whole, like, I'm actually triangulated anyway. I'm not so beholden to the Bernie folks. So
Are you saying that John Kasich is Joe Biden's sister soldier?
yeah, although to be a true sister soldier, Biden would have to like diss somebody on the left, which Biden has been too nice of a guy to do. Really, like he has earned the respect of Bernie Sanders, and Bernie really likes him. Unlike how Hillary and Bernie were, who were kind of at odds with each other. So
Yeah, I mean, I think Kasich is just sort of more. I mean, you're right, Zed, that he's not. I mean, if you had to pick the biggest villain, the biggest never Trumper Republican, sort of moderate Republican villain, it wouldn't be Kasich. But I think he's serving as just the trigger of the moment for this broader sort of project that horrifies the left, right? This never Trumperification of the party where you've got people like Bill Kristol and, Rick Wilson and these Bush era, people who, gosh, they killed how many people with a fake war, lied the country into a war, and et cetera, right? So I mean, I think it's more about that broader nightmare that it's sort of like summoning for the left, and I think it's a valid thing to react against and hate, but it's sort of where we're at right now. It's the nominee you have.
I think part of this is that something that Joe Biden did correct politically is that he doesn't think he has any permanent enemies, right? Like there's no permanent enemies in politics, no permanent friends in politics. Like I feel like Joe Biden actively courted this kind of thing. Like he wanted to have a very broad spectrum of people behind him. And I think if you just look at this like legislative endorsements, he does have a very broad spectrum of people behind him, including some very like liberal members of Congress, all the way up to like John Kasich and that forefront. And I think he kind of made everyone feel comfortable being with him. And I know that's partly, him being Obama's VP, him being someone the Democratic Party could rally behind to defeat Bernie Sanders, but it's also partly like something that he actively like courted and cultivated for himself. He didn't seem like the kind of guy who was establishing a whole lot of litmus tests. And I think that when it came to the Sanders movement and the political left of the Democratic Party, I feel like they weren't necessarily trying to inculcate a broad constituency the same way that Joe Biden was. I think that when you would see Cornel West dispatched to like the middle of Iowa or South Carolina, they didn't strike me as like trying to bring in people to speak at their rallies, to endorse them, to talk about them in the media, who were from a broad sense of the political spectrum. And I think Joe Biden did. I think Joe Biden sought that very carefully. And I think that's part of the reason this situation exists. Like, if Bernie Sanders was the Democratic Party's nominee, would he be able to get people to come speak at his convention who were middle of the road, maybe even a little conservative leaning? I don't know that he would. And it's not entirely because of what he believes in politically, but also because his approach is very closed off. Like, he doesn't, at least lately, I mean, I think in the past it was different, but lately he didn't do a whole lot to court people. Like, he never, from what I understand, he never tried to get Pete Buttigieg's endorsement at any point, right? Like, Joe Biden was consistently courting Pete to get him when he dropped out, and like Bernie wasn't doing that, right? Like, I kind of feel like it's partly the left's fault itself that it doesn't have that same broad coalition, an alternative coalition that would stand against the elite Never Trump coalition, because it just doesn't have that appeal among some of the more middle of the road or conservative leaning people.
You know, another thing that's different about this election is that nobody's paying attention to it. Like, I wonder if this coalition, the coalition that Biden is building, would be faring so well against Trump's coalition in a normal election context. I mean, it just seems to me like, I still receive the paper version of the New York Times. And every day I scan the headlines, and I would say probably once to twice a week is there a story on the front page about the presidential election. So, the people who are paying attention to this and getting sort of aggravated about Kasich, people on Twitter, political junkies. But I feel like, this whole election so far has just been defaulting to Biden. So Biden could be doing, he's phoning in this campaign. I agree that he's done a better job of reaching out to a broader constituency and to people who represent a broader constituency than Bernie Sanders, because how could he not? Bernie Sanders his campaign was so narrowly focused. But there's nobody surprising, right? These are it's just the Rolodex of folks you're going to call up for a conventional Democratic establishment campaign. He's just kind of sleepwalking through it, and it's working for him because the contempt for Trump is so high, because Trump is bungling the pandemic so much, and because nobody's watching, nobody's paying any attention. I think this race will tighten up further down the road, and people will start paying more attention. But at this point, it's hard. It's really hard to draw any conclusions because I feel like this election is happening in a different galaxy.
Well, that's the real that's the real kind of grift of the Lincoln Project, which is that they seem to be taking credit for Trump's poll numbers and everything, but I'm pretty sure the Lincoln Project didn't create the pandemic, didn't create the economic catastrophe we're in. Those macro kind of factors are doing a lot to sink Trump right now and to help Biden. And I think that's where someone like the Lincoln Project has to kind of ignore those factors or pretend like, no, it's our ads that we're making that are doing this. And they're making tons and tons of money off of this. And I think they've already told the media that after the election, if Biden wins, they plan to keep making Democratic Party type ads. So this really is an important moment for them because they have to be able to prove to all Democratic donors that they're really, really important. And even when there are, as you just mentioned, this election is kind of it's not really even about the campaign Joe Biden's running anymore. It's literally just about the fact that there's a bunch of things going wrong in America and Trump's the incumbent and he's not handling it well. So,
but listen, what you just said, it just completely validates the left's fears, right? I mean, if Biden does end up winning and they are considered critical partners in that victory, I mean, they are going to have a lot of sway, if they become the in-house, ad makers of the DNC, I mean, that's going to have an effect on the party. That's going to have an effect on the politics of the party, right? So I think they have a lot to fear in this.